Hi everyone, it's Sketcher Fashion Drawing Tutorials, and in this lesson we're going to render this Comme des Garçons Fall Winter 2016-17 look, pink PVC. So I have this front view pose. You can find something similar in sets of Sketcher templates if you have, or you can use like any pose. So as any of my tutorials, I'm focusing more on the texture rendering, so let's do it. I'm just finishing some details of the model. So we'll have this curly hair, but you can also see some details of the structure of this pose, so you can try to draw it. Just pause the video, keep the frame, and just try to redraw. So I'm starting drawing her clothing. You can see this drop like the cut of her collar, and just you can follow me. So we have two buttons. It's also important to draw this overlapping of the lapel, so the button makes sense, so you can feel that it is attached to the layer below, because sometimes people draw buttons so it seems like it's not really like attached. And so we have several layers. We have this sort of vest below, and then this jacket on the top. And the jacket is oversized, so I'm drawing this diagonal line stretching from the shoulder. We'll have some folds on the jacket because it's quite big. And as you follow, like when you draw, try to erase the body parts so you don't have too many lines. I uploaded the image of the design, so you can take a look. You can take a look at the folds and at the details, and maybe just draw it yourself, and then proceed to coloring already if you feel like it takes too much time watching as I'm drawing. And yeah, I sometimes like change things, erase, and usually I draw like a draft and then trace it to marker paper. But in this case, I'm just doing everything directly on the marker paper. So I have the reference image on the screen of my computer, and I recommend to use some device to see the original photo too. I hope that during quarantine, because it's 2020, spring, and all the world is almost in quarantine, I hope that you are taking some courses also to learn, like any nice drawing courses will assist you and just make your progress faster. Because if you simply practice and practice, you will grow, but if you will add some learning, you'll see progress much sooner, yeah. So here we have this opening, and I just try to make it really nice. And we have one more button below. Here the overlap, I made the left part a little bit longer. If you are watching in a full screen mode, you can see. So try not to make, if you have two objects next to each other, try to make the overlap so the lower edge is not the same, not one line. So on the other side, I just try to make it more or less similar lengths of the shoulder part. And I keep erasing the body area that I don't need anymore, that is covered with the jacket. I will keep upload these days more often because I was absent for quite a lot, and I'm like really sorry for that. I was submitting my thesis to Politecnico, and yeah, it was super difficult topic on a luxury and like cultural code. So it was difficult. I keep drawing, so you'll have some nice tutorials these days, and I hope you're not too busy. And okay, so I keep drawing the low part. If you pay attention, like you can see that the overlap at the edge of that vest or jacket is not even on left and right side. I made the left side a little bit longer, a bit lower. It's like important when you have an overlap, when two parts meeting each other on the same level, not to have the hemline the same for both of them. You need to show that they are overlapping, so it looks more natural, more it just looks better. So try to watch in the full screen modes, like any tutorial, so you can see all the details. You can see that the upper details are wider for your trousers, so they can get in, like one can get out of the other one, and they're still all like wider than your legs. So we make this upper parts of your trousers a bit wider, and they're like matryoshka. They just can get into each other. Okay, and here we've got some socks, and I make these wavy sides of the socks because we have this spiral folds, and we'll work with the shoes a bit later. So I used Blossom Pink to color all the details of this left side of your jacket, like both of jackets, and now I'm using Ice Gray 3. And I'm adding shadows, first of all, where they should be, like on the collar, on the lapel, this overlaps just under the upper jacket inside. Also along the contour, like on the shoulder. Also we have this area between two fabrics, the sleeve fabric and bodice fabric, because it's PVC, it's quite thick. We might have some, you know, this kind of valley between two parts. And I'm using dusky rose also because it's darker than blossom pink, but it's not as desaturated as gray. So sometimes I just need to add something a bit. Using now Ice Gray 2. I'm actually going to work with many different like tones of ice gray, degrees. Some are darker, some are lighter. So, and now adding just different shadows, because there are many wrinkles and the light is not falling the same way on the whole surface. So we just imagine some sort of front light, and we make this backside a bit darker, and we imagine some wrinkles. Now I'm using Ice Gray 1. For example, if you want to show not like really fold, but the surface has like some depressions on the surface, you can use like some light gray, like in my case Ice Gray 1, or you can use the same hue, like same marker that you use as a base color, and just make additional layer. It all depends on like how it looks. You just need to try. So I'm using Ice Gray 1. You can see I'm just darkening some parts, and Ice Gray 2, Ice Gray 3, just adding some more shadows. It's not like you have to use exactly like Ice Gray 3 or 2. They're very similar, and I use Ice Gray 3 just for really dark shadows. Sometimes I use this dusky rose, and then just desaturate because it's very bright. I'm just adding gray on the top of it. Ice Gray 2 I use in the area where I want to add contrast, but I feel like Ice Gray 3 is too dark, or I want to build like transition from Ice Gray 2 to the pink area, so I just color between them. But just take a look at what I'm doing. I'm just adding shadows where they should be, like if there is a wrinkle, if there is area that is inside. I try also to get rid of flat pink, because if the area is just pink and nothing else, it's for this type of texture, for something that is not laying flat on some like floor or table, it's a little bit unnatural. So you can use black pencil to add extra shadows. Like for example, you have a really deep wrinkle inside, like the fold, you can add some black pencil under this details as well, because for this highly reflective textures like PVC in our case, contrast is really important. So super light and super dark parts. So you can see I'm working with the same parts where I added shadows before. I'm adding more because I want really high contrast. And just if I missed some parts, if they are like too light, like that low part of the lapel, I'm just adding some extra shadows, like Ice Gray 1. I still keep some pink parts because I don't want to desaturate this jacket, like so it becomes too it loses the vividness of pink. And I'm using ice gray because this blossom pink is quite cold, so that's why ice gray works. If it was orange or yellow, I would probably use warm gray or maybe khaki, caramel, depends on the type of pink as well. So now I'm using white ink gel pen to add highlights. I add highlights, well, in the lightest parts, just along the lapel, along the collar, and also I'm going to, you will notice that I'm almost surrounding shadowed, like shadowed spots. Yeah. And I'm using Sakura white ink gel pen, and for that pen there are different sizes of the stroke. So I'm using 10. It's really thick and it's good for adding the strong highlights. As an alternative, you might use, if you have special opaque liquid for illustration, you can use it. You can use correction pen, even though it might be a little bit difficult to make thin lines. So you'll notice that as I go on, I keep working with ice gray 1. Sometimes I add this dusky rose for darker parts that I want to just to make a bit juicy with the color. And then I use, here let's add the thread line with just pencil, and just with ice gray 2 or ice gray 3 you can add some, you know, that small wrinkles that you get when the fabric is a bit it just has these wrinkles along the thread line, especially jeans has some. So I'm using shale. You can use still gray, like super dark, like cool gray 5 or ice gray 5. I used shale again, the same way as dusky rose, just because it has some tint of rose, of pink. So I used it to color those back parts, back elements that I just have the silhouette. You don't see them. Because we have these kind of stripes in the front that attach details, but we have also some at the back, and we can see them in these holes. So I used shale for that. So okay, I keep working using ice gray 2. This is inside details, so you can make them really dark. And let's color all these details. Okay, so working with ice gray 2, and as I told you before, you can work with ice gray 3. It's just a bit darker and you'll get stronger contrast. Then taking ice gray 1 to add just softer shadows, to add layer next to ice gray 2 for the transition. With ice gray 3 I'm adding shadows. Don't forget about the shadows when some part is above the other one, because we have a lot of overlaps and you need to think where we should have the shadow. So again, the thread lines. And in the middle, we have some highlights. Okay, so just some skin. Ice gray 3, next ice gray 1. Along that upper jacket, I'm adding some shadows. So usually when we have one like jacket on the top of something, even if it's dressed inside, so along the edges of the jacket we're adding shadows. And I add many different spots, like on all these parts with ice gray 1, because it's not something like all these belt parts, they are not perfect circles made of plastic, so they are all a little bit wrinkled, so that's why we need to show these many spots. And then I just add extra shadows with darker grays, adding some ice gray 3. Here we need some shadows because we have overlap. And highlights with white ink pen. And again with a black pencil, I'm adding some stronger shadows. Especially where you have two objects, one on the top of another, you will definitely have some darker shadows there. Like all these stripes, jacket on top of other jacket. On these stripes we'll also have some thread lines, the same way on the top and on the bottom. More of the shadows. And here we also have the overlap. And the highlights with white ink gel pen. Just adding extra gray with ice gray 1 here and there, where I want just to add contrast by darkening the darker parts. And going to work in a very similar way with 2 or 3 markers, ice gray 3 or ice gray 2 and ice gray 1. So ice gray 1 I just add in the middle or adjacent parts to the darker strokes. Everything that is at the back, all those stripes that are at the back, I'm coloring them with darker markers. You can just follow me or just take a look at the reference image and apply the strokes by yourself. but you can see that the strokes that are either like lines or like triangles, they're stretched along these parts of your trousers from the like a little bit vertically. I'm adding the seams with a pencil, and between the edge and that pencil strokes I'm adding some highlights. Darker gray for the inside. You can add extra layers because you should be darker in certain spots. And keep working with all these parts. Ice gray 1. Ice gray 2. Again, seams with a pencil, and then highlights. Okay, so I colored your skin, and I used dusky pink as a base color, and for the highlights that I left uncolored in the beginning, I used almond afterwards. In many tutorials I showed the way that I ran the skin, especially in the beginning of the tutorial usually, and you can take a look if you're new and this is your first lesson. Also add some shadows, as I told you before, everywhere where you have the overlap, like something is on the top of another thing, and highlights. So I also have some separate tutorials dedicated to the body and skin rendering, so you can take a look. Yeah, so seams, more of the contrast, more of the gray on the sides. Here we have two objects close to each other, so we have more shadows. You can see between the sleeve and her body we have more shadows. And I'm using warm gray too to add shadows on her skin, because we have all those shadows coming from those like stripes and just below the jacket. And by adding shadows we make everything look more realistic. Using cool gray 1 and adding many strokes on this fluffy part of your shoes, just like but don't overdo, we still need to have some white left. Next, using cool gray 2, adding shadows between the shoelaces, and also coloring. You see we have this spiral like folds just between them. And just coloring the soles of your shoes, and with cool gray 4 adding more, just coloring by adding the spots, like not 100% coverage, and adding extra shadows here and there between the shoelaces and her socks. I added blossom. You can see that certain parts I left uncolored. You can do that too if you want to have stronger highlights on this side a bit, but you can just color everything if you're fine with adding highlights with a just pen. So I started with Ice Gray 3, now I'm working with Ice Gray 2. You can see it's a little bit lighter than the part that I colored on the right. And Ice Gray 1. Take a look at the reference image. Usually, well, we have certain parts where we often add shadows like the silhouette, like the outline, some obvious folds. Here we have a lot of wrinkles because also the jacket is oversized and the body is smaller, so there is some pressure between your arms on the structure of the jacket. So all these shadows help us show that. Again, adding some dusky rose in the area with the fold, and just using blossom to build a very subtle transition. More of Ice Gray too, showing that V-shaped fold, like the deepening. And there we have this kind of big Y-shaped highlights you can see just below that V shadow. So everything is related. You have some deepening around it, you have highlights. Okay, so here we have deep crease, and I'm coloring everything that is on the other side with a dark gray, adding some spots. And using black pencil just to darken those shadows, and working with white pen, adding highlights along the edges of lapel, on your shoulder part. Following the shapes of the shadows, surrounding all those shadows. My highlights are not perfect lines, they sometimes break, sometimes they are thicker, sometimes they are thinner. So let's add some shadows inside to show that it's a bit, there is no light there. Okay, so now I'm working with this inner jacket. You can start with some Ice Gray too. And yeah. Again, working along the upper jacket to show that there is an overlap, and now adding some lighter gray, Ice Gray 1. Okay, with Ice Gray 4, I want to show some really strong shadows where we have this overlap. And just to build transition, adding some lighter gray next to it. And keep working with your right side trousers, or here we have some new type of clothing. That's a bit difficult to find a name for it. Okay, so first Ice Gray 2, now Ice Gray 1. Very similar way to like as we just worked with your left side, just trying to make everything a little bit differently, for sure different shapes of shadows, because just different position of the leg, and light is falling in a completely different unique way. Just remembering that when there is overlap, we're adding shadows just below. We're showing all the highlights mostly in the center, because it's still something circular, something that is surrounding your leg. So just like a cylinder, it has a light somewhere in the middle. So, and shadows are mostly on the sides. Adding a bit of Ice Gray 4, especially in the inner part of this, like inner part of this segments of the trousers. And we're left with your sleeve. And I'm adding just more of gray where I feel like I want, again, more contrast. And I'm adding this Sims. And now time for highlights where we're missing them. Extra shadows. Okay, so here I'm adding, after adding those shadows, showing the threads that just there, using yellow fine liner for her buttons, and then adding brown just spots on the top, and opposite to brown, adding some white spots as a highlight. Extra gray here and there. And I want to add this dusky rose because I feel like I want to have more of pink pigment. I feel like we added a lot of gray and she looks, yeah, overall the look is a bit desaturated, so I want to add in the shadows where we have this dark gray, I'm adding also a bit of dusky rose. This reminds me of a knight or a lobster, something, some creature, which is really cool. It's possible to translate one thing or a concept into another, not just something usual and typical. It's really interesting. So mostly I'm adding where we have shadows. Like you see the sides of these parts, like overlaps. Because we have this light pink, I don't want to destroy it. I want to keep it there, not adding any extra color, and definitely not darkening the tone that we have. Alright, so some extra highlights with a white ink pen. Someone is not following quarantine outside. So sorry for all that noise. There are some bikes and racers, I can hear them. And yeah, so more of highlights with white ink pen. Cool. So what is next? After this many spots, you can also, besides adding highlights, you can add extra shadows with a black pencil, and you can also use some other pencil like purple. For example, if I want to add some hue to the shadows that we have, but not to super dark ones like we did with a black pencil, you can use this purple or violet pencil, and you can see it will add color to our look, because before I told you that I don't want to have this kind of dull pink that we get with too much of gray. So you can bring it back by adding a little bit of pencil. And I'm adding the purple in the area with the shadows. And it's basically area with ice gray 2 or ice gray 3 or anything darker. And you can see we get this really nice cool effect. it makes our pink also colder because it is a cold hue. You can experiment and just add some different pencil and just see how it goes. Okay, so a bit here. You can see I'm not adding pencil in the middle where we have highlights because I want that area to be light. It's supposed to be light. Okay, hair. I'm going to, since she has curly hair, it's like a wave, all these curves. So you can see I'm leaving this tiny path of light every time the curve goes up. So on the top of that curve, I'm leaving the highlights. And of course I try to make them different so it doesn't look like she has some plastic hair, something natural. And on the top here I just keep some spots, color it. And yeah, and then take some lilac or amethyst, anything that is light violet type of hue, just color all those highlights and then add extra like strokes with a black pencil to give it more natural look. So and then we are done with this tutorial. This is PVC with many shadows and strong highlights. I hope that you like this tutorial. I would be happy to see your works on Instagram, just tag me. And thank you for being my patron and see you in next tutorial.